Awesome. Okay, we are now recording. So it's my honor and my pleasure to be here. Again, I'm Rabbi Dara Lithwick. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here with the most amazing Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, scholar in residence at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, advocate, ally, maker and matcher of traditional and radically progressive when it comes to LGBTQ rights and the importance also of allyship as spiritual practice. And we're going to talk today as part of Pride Month and just as part of everything that's been going on in the world so recently, about a very recent publication, Chaver Up. 49 rabbis explore what it means to be an ally through a modern Jewish lens. So in this conversation, I invite us to, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We're going to sort of do a little bit of a fireside type chat, though it's kind of warm out, so maybe not, poolside chat, I guess you can call it. And we'll be able to have a bit of a discussion too, and we'll be able to ask questions. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce Rabbi Moskowitz and tell us, how did we get here and what was the inspiration for this wonderful book?
Rabbi, as always, it's a distinct honor and pleasure to be here, and thank you for the generous words and the invitation, and for contributing to this book. It's powerful because people spoke from their hearts. And yours in particular is powerful because it speaks about our necessity to be both allies to the outside world and also receive allyship. So we got here because things got really bad in America, and it's not like they got bad for the first time. I think there was just a heightened awareness of how bad things really are for so many people in this country, particularly people of color, and what I think used to be a certain level of awkwardness that's intrinsic to allyship because it's predicated on the world being broken. If people weren't being dehumanized, we wouldn't need to stand up and do something about it. That level of awkwardness was the deterrent for, let's say, people who are not people of color holding up signs that say Black Lives Matter, or things that just felt like not our lane. And things got so bad that the awkwardness of doing something was, I think, outweighed by the awkwardness of being silent. And it became just a new opportunity that people felt like, I don't know the right thing to do, but doing nothing isn't helping. And so we wanted to try to find better language and uncover within our tradition the wisdom of ideal ways and different modalities of being an ally. And one of the things that I think I've been thinking a lot about is how reactionary allyship really is by its core, right? Somebody's in need, there's a void, and somebody else has resources. And so in the last number of years, there's been a lot of talk about, like, we need to create safe spaces, and we need to maybe even extend that and be proactive in dismantling unsafe spaces. But I think at the core, I've been struggling with how is it that the dominant culture became one of unsafe spaces in the world? And what does it look like to stop responding to, like, oh, there's an issue over here with voter suppression, and oh, there's an issue over here with all sorts of other oppressions. What does it look like to, like, try to live in a more ideal way where we simply elevate people's spiritual identities and to create a model of sensitivity and reunification of humanity, that we never allow things to get beyond a point of awareness of something, because as soon as we find out that something's going on, then we fix it right away. So that was really about trying to influence influencers. Like, how is it that we can get people who already have an audience to try to themselves work on expressing their own perspective, and hopefully as a result influence those within their communities.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And so in terms of this book, you had sort of 49 contributors. It seemed like quite a range too, in terms of backgrounds and denominational backgrounds, experiential backgrounds, and more. And how did that come together?
Well, you can imagine asking 49 rabbis to hit a deadline for submitting an article was not simple. But we wanted to really model what it looks like to be in communities. So we wanted the representation of the rabbinic leadership to be as diverse as our people. So we invited as many, rabbis of trans experience and rabbis of color, and people who were, Jews by choice, and people who we felt, one of the ways in which we think about person first language is that we wanted people that had intelligent things to say, who happen to also then, be in different segments of society, because that influences and kind of on some level filters their experiences. And so Rabbi Chaim and I both reached out to who we thought would be the most ideal people that would be willing to do this and have thoughtful things to say, that also was people coming from very different perspectives. There were some who wrote about allyship, to their aging sick parents. There were some who spoke about allyship, around Israel and Palestine, and those who wrote about receiving it. There was a rabbi there who is hearing impaired, and he spoke about, what does it mean, to be in this space, and then the messiness. Allyship is as often, it's as elusive as it is aspirational. And the final article in the collection is a Rabbi, Dan Judson, who was an intern at CBST, and he's straight. He's now, I believe, up in Boston, and he took a job as a rabbi right out of rabbinical school of a synagogue that had fired a woman who was a lesbian for getting pregnant, basically. And he spoke about what did that mean to be in a space that was only available to him because of the prejudice and homophobia, and to be in that space and then to use it as a platform that his synagogue was instrumental in marriage equality and other things. And so it's tricky, and part of it is granting permission that, like, this is not the world that we built, but it's the one we inherited, and we have to answer the question of now what. And often it's not ideal. So what does it look like to move the needle, and how to compromise, and how to keep walking forward and invite people in conversation, even if they don't see the world the same way. So it's a lot of different people speaking from the heart, which again is, I think, why these articles are so powerful. Parents of trans children, parents of children with disabilities, and being inside communities and outside communities, and really speaking and giving language to how to navigate the complexities of those.
For sure. I mean, I love how the book also opens with the teaching, it says, currently we understand an ally to be someone in a position of privilege who chooses to act on behalf of others who are more at risk. Then unpacking that. We are living in holy space when we can act with the power of allyship and also receive the gift of allyship, as you were touching on. And you bring, Mishnah Avot, chapter 6, number 6, teaches that in order to acquire Torah, one must be noseh be'ol im chavero, sharing in the burden of one's friend, one's chaver. So chaver up, in that sense, and explaining that by requiring us to share in this burden of one's friend, the Mishnah is asking us to personally take on the burden and relieve the one being pressed down by it. And it's this element, I think, of I love this I mean, it just made me think, like, many hands makes for light work.
Yeah, it's a great visual image. Yeah.
And the idea that when you have somebody joining your space or sharing with you, it lifts you up, and we lift each other up. And even if we're hurting ourselves, even in that hurt, if we reach out, we all get buoyed by it, we all get lifted by it, in some ways. And I love sort of the framing here too about how it's not a nice to do, it seems, like that this is an obligation. It's an essential for us to ally up, to chaver up in a way. And how do we motivate ourselves to keep doing it, particularly if we come, we're tired. I mean, we're tired. We've had to advocate in queer spaces. We had to advocate in Jewish spaces. We have to advocate, around. And yeah. I love sort of, again, that message there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there's another Mishnah earlier on in Pirkei Avos in the first chapter. It says, "Chaver." Person needs to acquire for themselves a friend. Yeah. And I think, through the lens of allyship, what it means is, we're not allowed to live uninvested in the welfare of others. And it's just the Hebrew word for what I think is in our tradition for ally is chaver. Chaver we normally translate as friend. And really what it means is to be attached. An author is a mechaber, they attach thoughts and words to paper. If something's attached to the ground, it's mechuber l'karka. And it actually, comes from the Latin to bind. And what it means is really to be attached to another in a way that they don't feel alone. And also that we don't feel detached, because a person can be alone and privileged. And, we talk a lot about it's not good to be alone. That's not just part of the human experience. The Medrash tells us in the Genesis narrative that the original kind of primordial emptiness and void of the universe was God's loneliness, that we're creating the image of God. It's not good for God to be alone. And part of God's perfection is really the need to give. And so one of the things that also I think needs to be destigmatized is like this idea of privilege, that people feel like, it's weird, it's awkward, you can't talk about it, but it's a commodity. If you have a voice and people listen, so then what are you doing with it? And this is not just around allyship. This is about much more broadly that if we have resources, we're responsible. The Vilna Gaon says more than the poor person needs the wealthy needs the poor. Because after 120, God's going to say, I gave you $1 billion. What did you do with it? I give you $1 million. I give you $100. Right? What did you do with the resources? I made you really smart. Tzadok HaKayin writes, a person has a beautiful voice. They have to be very careful in the way in which they speak. Because if God gave a person a gift, you have to make sure you don't defile it. So part of this is recognizing that we're all very gifted, right? If right now you're watching this, you have a computer, you have internet, right? That's a lot better off than a lot of people. So we might not have billions of dollars, and but that doesn't mean that we don't have an ear to listen, or that we couldn't, check in on someone. How are you doing? I've been thinking about you. There are things that don't cost anything, and there are things that don't require great skills outside of a caring heart. So part of this is really, I think historically people felt like this was a profession, like would be a street activist. I'm gonna get arrested and all the things. And I think this is about combating the microaggressions with microaffections. Are you holding the door for someone? Are you smiling? Are you making eye contact? Whatever you do during the day, do it being aware of those around you, and realizing that you have the ability to make life a little bit easier by taking off some of that burden, by seeing them and recognizing the humanity that exists within them.
Yeah. Amen. I mean, I love that. And I love, thinking about this work of allyship as Torah. I mean, going also in Talmud, like Rab Yirmiyah said, Amar Hasek b'tzorkei sibor kasok b'divrei Torah, the one occupied with the needs of the community is like one who's occupied with matters of Torah. There's a Torah in our interactions with each other. There's a Torah in reaching out to each other, it seems. And
yeah, but both in that, like, our wisdom, our tradition teaches us the best way to do that, the way in which it tells us how to, operate in all the other spaces of human exchanges. But that's the purpose of the Torah. The Torah wasn't given so that it could be studied in the halls. The Torah was given so that it, ours is a religion of action, and so it's an applied theology. And so if we're not engaged with the people, and that's what my article is about, that you have to be in a chabura. The Torah is only acquired in a collective, because if a person is insensitive to the needs of those around them because they're not around other people, so that you don't understand. And one of the things that systemic racism and other issues have been able to perpetuate themselves is because they give us this narrative that we're different. We live in a different part of town. We go to different schools. We speak differently. We dress differently. Those aren't our people. And then, okay, so then we're not engaged. There's no transparency. We're not seeing what's going on. It's not my problem. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And that's a false narrative that only comes to separate and to really to dehumanize. That whatever makes us different by our different cultures is not nearly as strong as that which binds us together as humans.
Amen. And so we're in Pride Month. We're in June. I mean, Ottawa has its capital Pride in August, which will be very close this year to the high holidays. But June, I mean, we mark at the end of June the anniversary of the Stonewall riots. There's a lot going on right now. What do you see as our growing edges in terms of the work to be done around? I mean, you could maybe speak to the States, we could speak to Canada, around Pride, and around Pride.
Yeah, I think this is on some level the best it's ever been around Pride. One of the things that's an edge here, which it's hard for me to understand exactly, but there's a huge pushback over the last few years. In fact, there were more than one Pride March here because there's some who feel that it's become too commercialized. It's now part of capitalism, and indeed, in every single store window, whatever they're selling, whether it's cupcakes or boots or raincoats, everything has rainbows on it. And there's some people that very much feel like, the very first Pride March was a riot in Stonewall in '69, and there's still a lot more that we need to achieve. And so this is not something that we should be celebrating in terms of, allowing people who often, companies that, take the rainbow, but then don't advocate around legislation. Or, I just saw an interesting article on a certain shoe company, but for particularly women of trans experience, often they have bigger feet. And so are those shoes companies, catering female footwear to women of trans experience, and like, you want the money, but you're not willing to do it. But I think about this very, very broadly, that again, so much of this is reactionary, that it's almost like, I just had bronchitis last week, and so I went and got some antibiotics, and thank God they're not really side effects, but there was a whole list. And something's wrong, so you take something, but it doesn't fix it. It like deals with it, but it overcorrects in a certain way, that like there are things that are unintended consequences. But we say, listen, the side effects of this are not as bad as not doing it, so it's worth doing it. And I think that's really what's happened with Pride. That Pride is a reaction to being, if the world was always queer friendly, there would be no queer marches, right? There wouldn't have been a Stonewall had there been equal rights. We don't celebrate women's ability to vote had it not been for the fact that women couldn't have voted up until 100 years ago here. So one of the things that I think is really worth thinking about is that whenever you take a detour, and then you take a detour from a detour from a detour, right, you're further away from the source and the cause. And when we think about what every piece of dehumanization has in common, right, that has nothing to do with store front windows. And so it's really important to keep the focus on what's really at the core of this. And I think just to kind of bridge this to what's going on, I think in Canada, what I read about is that we all have a kind of a story of origin. And for people in America, it's not a good story how this country was built. It's not pleasant to think about. It's not pleasant to talk about. And growing up, we were taught, the American dream and all the things, which for, white, straight, cis, often Christian, but religious, white men is not the same story as it is for many in America. And so part of what I think Pride reminds us is, yes, there's a lot to celebrate because there's been a lot of progress, but the fact that I now have a certain amount of freedom, it doesn't take away from me the responsibility to keep fighting until everybody has the same freedom.
Amen. And there's so much going on, and right here where I'm standing right now, I'm in Ottawa. I'm on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the peoples. There's a lot of work. Given there's a lot of work of reconciliation that we have to do here in Canada, and in terms of looking how, again, to ally up and to partner up to engage in that deep work of reconciliation. I know one of our leaders at our synagogue in this process, maybe even two of our leaders at our synagogue are on this, are in this Zoom meeting, who are leading our reconciliation committee at our synagogue, to see how we as a synagogue can engage in that process of, say, reconciliation too. And it's, there's all this has come even more to the fore here in Canada a few weeks ago with the discovery of unmarked graves of 215 children at an Indian residential school in British Columbia. They're at an old Indian residential school, and looking at that as a for many of us who the shadow of the Holocaust is still behind us. When we hear that and we see that, the residential school system in Canada has been deemed very clearly a cultural genocide. That work sort of this has been known, but just that discovery has sort of made everything very fresh again, and I think has our whole country asking, what do we do now to heal, and how do these, even us coming from Pride and being here in Pride, how do we take that piece of us, or the Jewish piece of us, aid in, say, efforts at reconciliation?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have deep in our tradition kind of the awareness and the capacity, the elasticity to hold a lot of different feelings simultaneously. Perhaps the most repeated trope within our liturgical tradition is, Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, remembering that, the exodus of Egypt, that we were dehumanized, we were enslaved, we were oppressed, we were in a posture of fragility, and we repeat that every year to not become complacent. We go out into a sukkah to pivot and then kind of accept that posture of fragility again, to remind ourselves that most of us are blessed that we're not out being unhoused through the year, but there are many that are. And every night on the Seder, we talk about how, the story that in this arc that we were, even like both on a spiritual level, we started in this really horrific place of idolatry and being in exile, and then we were able to come and kind of reclaim kind of a human identity again, and a spiritual identity. So the big principles of allyship start with the recognition that no one's life is ever hypothetical, that we can talk about, things, but if those folks are not in the room, so then we're talking, right? Every aspect of this kind of centers around relationship building and proximity. It's much easier to dehumanize somebody from a distance. As a proof text, Jacob's brothers say that they saw him, from the verse says they saw him from afar and sought to do him harm. It's much easier to hate people and things that you've never met or experienced. It's not real. So it needs to be real. It needs to be real, not just to show up when things are bad, but to be able to develop real relationships with folks on the ground in different communities, even when things are good, because it's about relationships, and relationships aren't just when it's good or when it's bad, but it needs to have depth. We in social justice circles talk about no justice for us without us. There needs to be representation. And we have also in our tradition an idea of reparations. In fact, when Joseph is reunited with his brother Benjamin, he gives him 300, pieces of silver. And the commentators point out it's because when there was 12 brothers, each one took a month to work out there while one was taking care of their father Jacob. But when Joseph wasn't there anymore, Benjamin had to, work 1/12 more because one brother was missing. And so because of, even though it wasn't his fault, he wanted to make sure that he was whole. And so he actually paid him that type of reparations because of kind of the forced labor, as it were. And so we have to take an accounting, and the person can't repent for something while the injustice is still ongoing. And so I think the first question is, what part of this is still in existence, meaning that it's still happening in present tense? What can we do to stop that? And then there needs to be accounting of who's responsible. And for those who are looking for additional reading, Isabel Wilkerson has a wonderful book, Cast, and she gives a great parable about people who want to deflect by saying, listen, I never enslaved anybody, my ancestors never. So she gives this great story about, a person buys an old house, and then a few months into it, you realize the cellar is moldy and the thing is leaking. And so the fact it's an old house, you bought an old house. And so the fact that, you weren't the one who built the foundation, the fact that you didn't, allow a flood, it's irrelevant. This is your house now. And so I think we need to feel like we're inhabitants of this planet. It doesn't make a difference, the poor choices that came before us. We have to own them as the responsible tenants now.
I think that's so important. And I mean, I think again, it's all ongoing work, and we're never necessarily going to finish it, but we still have to do it. It's honest, but we're still not off the hook. I mean, and I was looking at it sort of there's a number of so many amazing people in this book. I mean, I was thinking about, first of all, the feeling of being on the receiving end of allyship, which I was so lucky to be when I was coming out as a young adult or that sort of thing, and didn't have support at home, but had a lot of support from my rabbi, and how that was game changing for me, and is game changing for my sense of faith, and game changing for my family too, and help bring them around. So really, it makes a difference, in whatever way we can be allies. And it's, just looking at the arc of just the change in rights and acceptance and real deep inclusion over the past, say, 25 years, it's been really amazing in terms of from an LGBTQ perspective. There's still work to be done for sure. But there's such a role, I think, for allyship, and particularly, like, I may be able, I may feel I'm able to parent, I'm able to be married, I'm able to do this as a lesbian. But some of my trans friends might not still have full comfort in the same way, might still experience discrimination in ways that I might not, or might, very rarely, and things like that. And so there's still a role for me to play to ally up in an in a queer environment. There's something too when you're saying, particularly around, I think, something that's very big in the U.S. Reform movement, which are synagogues, part of the Union for Reform Judaism, and now in the Canadian Reform movement, I'm the Tikkun Olam chair here in Canada, is a racial justice campaign, which we're trying to build up here. And there's a piece by something that you were talking about, and there's a piece in here by another friend, Rabbi Stephanie Colan, who I love, who's in New York, and to believe, it's to believe, the title is To Believe That Another's Truth is True, Humility and Empathy at the Core of Allyship. And coming back to that and looking at, we just had sort of a string of some really hardships here in Canada with the horrific murder of a wonderful Muslim family in London, Ontario, and then sort of before that, coming out of sort of the war in Israel, Gaza, there rise in anti-Semitism here and there, and also Islamophobia as well coming out of that too, and anti-Arab sentiment. So it's all mushed together in different ways, and I think that that piece, to believe that another's truth is true, humility and empathy at the core, there's a strength there.
Yeah, I got into this work, for those who don't know, when someone in my family transitioned and from female to male. And they said to me, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. And I said, how do you know? I know how I'm a guy, and it's not the same way. And so he said to me, I just am. And it took me a few weeks to gain any sort of traction, because I was like, what do you mean? I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. And I got to what I think is a relatively, evolved space of just realizing that, yeah, I really don't understand, and to try to understand it from their experience is not going to be generative. And we have this in our tradition, Adelo Yado, on Purim, we get to this high level of knowing that we don't know. But that doesn't mean that we can't listen, and it doesn't mean that we can't say, okay, so what do you need from me, and teach me, and I want to try to understand better. But this week's parsha is Parshas Chukas. Chukas is it's a chayik. I would like to write about it this week, but just last week, a guy, he's trans. He reached out to me because he's got a kid who's genderqueer, and he said to me, I just don't get it. He's a very binary trans man, very binary. He looks more masculine in presentation than I do. And so he said, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And I said to him, friend, let me give you a secret. I don't get any of it. It doesn't make a difference. You don't have to understand it. You just don't. It's not a piece of the puzzle. And if you start searching for it, it's not going to be helpful. So yeah, there's a lot to understand about what we don't understand. The verse where God asks us to be holy, it says, "Kadeshim to you ki kadesh ani." God says, I want you to be holy because I'm holy. But the commentators point out that the word kadesh is spelled differently. One's with a vav, one's without a vav, because we're not God. So can we relate to God a little bit? Like, we have souls that come from God, and we have the ability to make choices, and there's a consciousness there that comes from God that's relatable. But we're not the infinite sources of the universe, right? I can't find half my socks, much less be able to do anything intelligent. So there's a recognition that I have struggles in my life. I know what it's like, to be on the street on some level when there's a rise in anti-Semitism and different, right? What does it feel like to be stared at? What does it feel like for people to say obnoxious things to you? I can relate to that. So there's a different set of obnoxious things, right? So we're able to relate enough from what does it feel like for us in our world to get a glimpse into an aspect of, but it's enough to say that wasn't pleasant. I can imagine if it was like that all the time in ways that I haven't, it would only be worse than what I experienced, and what I experienced wasn't pleasant. So yeah, I think that there's something to be said for reframing what the goal is, right? Because if it's about understanding, I'm not going to know what it's like to be a person of color. When I get pulled over by the cops, they ask me for bracha. right? It's a different sensation, it's a different experience. It's not. So to try to like get into it, like what that must be like, we can all understand in a cerebral way, but I don't think that's where like those aren't the gems or the nuggets. That's not what we're trying to harvest. I think what we're trying to harvest is a sensitivity that like, when you love somebody, you know what their favorite foods are. You know what type of music they like. You know what makes them happy and what makes them sad. We need to love humanity enough that we're tied into it, that we can say like, oh, this is not okay. No human would want this to happen, and it is happening. So I think that's the work, is to feel. One last, there's a story that's told over by Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. He's the Or Sameach. He lived, he dies I think in the 1920s, and he lived in a place called Dvinsk. But there wasn't a big yeshiva there. But during the winter months, the yeshiva would send two boys to like keep him company and help him out, and they would study with him. So they were having a very difficult time with a certain commentary on the side of the Gemara Tesis. And so the boys are studying and they're trying to understand it and they can't. Finally, the Rosh comes and they say, no, how's it going? He says, it's very difficult. We don't understand it. So he says, okay, so let's take a moment and let's pray to Hashem. Let's daven that we have greater love for the Torah. And so the boys look at each other and they can't hold back. And they say, finally, like, once we're going to resort to praying, why don't we just pray to understand what this author is writing? Why this additional step? And so he said, you have a baby, gets dropped off at daycare. The kid starts crying, and so there's a list of the things that the people who are watching after the kid will go through. Maybe the kid's hungry, maybe the kid's dirty, maybe the kid, something's too tight or too loose or they're cold. You go through this list. But when the parent comes in and sees the child, they understand exactly what's wrong, right? Because they're so in touch with the child that they know what's that. So he says, if we were more in touch with the Torah, if we would love the Torah more, we'd understand what it was saying. And it's a different perspective. And I don't think there's enough heart. Everyone's writing and thinking and all the things. We don't need to think more. We need to feel more. We need to love more. We need to care more. So, you have somebody who's, their community just, experienced the tragedy. You don't have to have intelligent things to say. You could say, I'm my heart's broken. I just want you to know that, like, I care. This hurts me. And I can only imagine it hurts you more. So you know you're not alone. You don't need intelligent things. You need to be able, and if you don't feel it, then you need to ask yourself, why aren't you feeling this? Because it wasn't my children, because it wasn't my community, because it wasn't my house of worship.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. Is behind me. I have this bag that I got a couple of years ago. I was in Israel for Pride, and this was from Jerusalem Open House, and it says "Et Lahava," a time for love, from Tehillim, from Psalm,
from Ecclesiastes.
From Kohelet. Thank you. And I feel like that, like at the core, like Chesed, compassion, empathy, love, like it does get us places.
Yeah, and if that part is missing, then really nothing else matters. And I think we talk a lot in social justice circles about intentionality and impact. And like, yes, you got to narrow the space, and ideally there's no space between the two. But when people present and they present with deep intentionality, I'm here, I want to help. Okay, so people can be forgiving and compassionate when it falls short. But if that part is missing, impact that comes from somebody who wasn't attempting, to present with the right type of intentions, like it doesn't feel, I think, as good as even when the impact is a little bit off or less than ideal when the intentions are there. And again, it's one of these kind of like, again, I was doing a conversation with a man of trans experience, and we were schmoozing before the event. And my pronouns are part of my name. I don't type them in. They come up with my name now. And his didn't have pronouns. And he said to me, I should probably put my pronouns up there, but truth is I don't want to. I went through a lot of anguish and spent a lot of money to be able to present in a way that I don't need to tell you what my pronouns are anymore. And the other side of that spectrum is, a person says, okay, I'm going to start putting up, pronouns. And I'm going to announce, my preferred pronouns are. And then someone shoots them down by saying, it's not a preference. Like the word preference, I don't prefer to be called he, him. I am he, him. And then a person feels like it's not worth it. Why should I, go out on a limb just to get. And so I think there's an awareness that when people are doing it for the right reasons, whether you're doing it, you're not doing it, are you trying to make the world better or not? And I think, one of the things that's really been lost in this country is the capacity to hold complexity and to have any sort of nuanced conversations, whether it's about Israel or if it's about politics or it's about, even in sports, evidently 9 out of 10 people, when their favorite player goes to their least favorite team, that's it. They can't hold the complexity of, this is my favorite player or my least favorite team. That's it. The person's no longer my favorite player. So it's not healthy. And I think for me, the easiest way of trying to hold space with people who see the world differently than I do is that often, if you're willing to like dig a little bit deeper, often people really do want the same things. They think there's a better way to get there. So I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in the South, lots of guns, and they're good people with guns. I can be friends and in conversation with people who care just as much that there should be no gun violence and want to do whatever it takes to protect people from gun violence, but happen to think that the way to get there is by having more guns. I disagree. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think there should be fewer guns, but we want the same things, right? We want a world free of gun violence. Okay, so then you can be friends with that person and fight about how to get there, and you can look to scientists and experts and data. And the same thing, if you want peace in the Middle East, like, do you want that everybody should have dignity and everybody should have running water and education and so, okay, so we can fight about the best way to get there. So I don't know why there's such division now. Maybe it was always this way and we're just more aware of it. I mean, I think there's more division now, but it takes effort to be able to say, even though you have a different bumper sticker, I still want to have a conversation. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about now, particularly in these conversations about allyship and, at what point do you give up on somebody? And just, there's an idea in our tradition of, there's such a thing called Havdalah. We make a separation. But the Gemara says that the order of Havdalah was established in Yavne. And Yavne is a city that held the rabbis, but it's also the order, Yayin B'samim Ner Havdalah. It spells the word Yavne, yes, the first letter of each thing. So if you can never remember which order, right? Yeah. But there's an order to separate yourself. You can't just blow somebody off. You have to first try to engage in all the different steps. And then, so you can't walk away until you realize that you can't walk any closer.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to, because I know that there might be questions. I'm going to take off our spotlights. I'm going to go to gallery view. And I'm going to enable us to ask some questions. I trust that everybody will. I mean, I think it's a pretty snazzy group of people here. And let's have some time to talk together. And I'm just sorry, I'm a bit of like a Luddite technologically, so give me a moment to just unspotlight us. And goodness, I definitely want to unspotlight myself. Okay. And we could you can put your thing to gallery view or that sort of thing. Are you able to, our participants, I think, are you able to unmute yourselves? I think you can, yes. So if you have a question, if you want to write something in the chat, or you could just, you can also, I think under reactions, there is a raise hand option. So if you have a question or something, you can raise your hand and we can call on you, or you could put it in the chat and open it up that way. Sort of as we go through, I mean, I find this is so important for right now. The idea of being there and covering up for each other, like, stepping out and stepping in for each other. I just heard something happen, but I don't know if that was, no, I don't know if that was a reaction. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? Anything to ask? Anything on your mind? That sort of thing. It's like, well, I usually have to count down from 10, like, and then somebody will ask. We can think about this in all different aspects of our lives too, and what we bring from pride and during pride and what we take in different places too. No question is a bad question. All questions are good questions. And Rabbi too, you can ask questions too. You can ask questions of me and I can try to answer or to us as well. I mean, if you want to sort of get the context here and in Ottawa, where things are slowly opening up, thankfully. Oh, so we do have a question from Guillermo. How hard or easy is it to be progressive on LGBTQ issues in the Orthodox world?
Well, it's a great question. For me, it's very easy. For the Orthodox world, less easy. But it is getting better. Um, just, on Thursday, a woman reached out to me that they have a genderqueer kid, actually a trans kid, a kid who's transitioned, and they're Orthodox, and the mother's super supportive, and they have a son who's actually in like a yeshiva ultra Orthodox space. He's coming back from a year in Israel, and she wanted to talk to me about what to do to give it the best chance of being successful. So Friday morning we speak, and I ask, which yeshiva is he in? Happens to be in the yeshiva that I used to teach in, and then that I was part of for a number of years, and I still am very close to many of the rabbis there. So I said I'm happy to speak to the rabbis there. They're good people. They might not be all the way there yet, but they're never going to sanction their student being obnoxious. Like that's not on the agenda. And so I sent an email to the director of the program saying, hey, there's a student, who's finishing up the year there. And since he's been away, one of his siblings has transitioned, and, the kid knows, but there's been some static, and I would like to talk to you about how to best prepare everybody for the complexities of what awaits, and how to best do this. And he said, I'd be delighted to talk to you. It's that conversation couldn't have happened, right? And wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. I think the greatest contributor to the progress in the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox world right now is the awareness of the reality of the LGBT experiences. When the world was less safe, people suffered in silence, and it was this binary: if you came out, you needed to get out. And now people are able to stay in those communities. They're not always accepted, they're not always celebrated, but they're often not thrown out either. And so more and more people are getting to know that people in their lives, people who they love already, are part of the LGBT community, and you can't pray it away, and that conversion therapy doesn't help, and asking queer folks to marry straight never ends well. And so the recognition that there are people who want to not choose between the different identities, and that they're in the community, is forcing the conversations to actually happen in ways in which they've never happened before. And as a result, they're getting different answers.
Great question, great answer. Thank you so much.
Hi. I just wanted to jump into something. I loved what the rabbi said about privilege, that it actually is a commodity, and it's something that we should actually be generous about and use that, and from whatever position, for wherever we're coming from. But that was beautiful, because I never heard that put in that light. So it's always meant to shame, basically, right? It's almost it's almost a negative, and so here you come, and you actually portray this as an empowerment to actually create and start change. And just to go back to Torah itself, I mean, it's the examples you were giving about what can we do? Well, we as you say, what we have to do, but we don't have to understand at first. I mean, Naaseh and Nishma, and that is right there in the Torah, and however you want to interpret it, it's first you first be a mensch, you first do what you don't want happen to you, and then you can understand, go through the ceremony, go through everything else to get to that place if you need to understand, but on a human level. So I think we did a lot of harm about that. I think we go too much into our analysis also takes us away from the actual subject many times, and then we get a little bit, it gets distorted on the way, depending who's doing that. So that was a beautiful, and I think you should always use that when you explain this aspect of what it is, that not to be shamed by it, but it's something to use in a positive, very positive way. Also, I just took a little note here. You talk about when we're all commanded in one way or the other for kinyan haaretz. So kinyan, Kinyan means a form of ownership, but it's much more organic ownership, if that's the way I see it. And we need to take ownership of everything that needs to be fixed. And to do that is to start becoming uncomfortable, is to take one out of one's comfort zone and just see and participate and belong. And with that is a form of investment. And we all do it in our own ways, but Rabbi, I think you hit a formula. I think that is really what we're looking for. We're looking for action. There are a couple of us here who went through the 70s with the triple SJ, and getting this needs action, and from within, and we have to own it. We have to own it in so many ways. And we talk about this even with issues that are going on beyond our control. The ownership of, I was just, it really hit me when I started to learn about the indigenous history. I'm having been in Canada a short amount, living in Canada a short time. I know Canada for a long time already. I felt very, how should I say, displaced when I heard about it, and I said, why don't I know about this? I mean, where have I been? And it's good to get humble like that. It's good for everybody not to know. That's what I meant by getting out of your comfort zone. It's a humbling. You have to be humble. You have to have that before you start understanding and learning. And so, Rabbi, thank you. I think you gave us kind of a code here. What to go ahead, how to go about doing this, of understanding. I mean, the whole concept of Ali Up and Chaver Up. I love that. So thank you.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I hope you have a chance to get the book and read it.
I certainly will. I certainly will.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and cannot wait till we can do Limud again.
Together, everything together.
I mean, just to sort of build on that getting into that place of discomfort or hover, it's I mean, I have on my t-shirt, this is from this is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love thy neighbor as thyself, is how it's translated. And I remember this was like at our kids' Torah school. It said, first, you don't have, which is a different interpretation, which says, it says love that whoever's with you, love your neighbor. It doesn't say agree with them. It doesn't say agree with them. It says love them. And so it's like getting into those spaces of caring so deeply about their fundamental humanity to be able to want their success as much as we want our health and our success. Sorry,
I listened to Rabbi Benny Lau. I don't know if you've heard of Rabbi Benny Lau. He's doing amazing stuff in Israel, just bringing, just fantastic. And he talked about this, and he said, actually, he added, V'ahavta ra'echa kamocha, no, V'ahavta ra'echa afilu ihu lo kamocha. Even more so that, the impetus has to be right there. You have to go out there, and he's not like you. You love them. This is, and he was, so many levels. He was talking about that, about beautiful, really beautiful. So,
and on that, Merle asked a great question. So what are 3 ways that LGBTQ people would like to say be supported by their allies? I mean, there might not be a generalization. I figure many of us here, who might have different things on our lists in terms of support. But what have you heard, let's say?
Yeah, I would say, one thing that's not small is that elections matter. Who do you support? Who are you publicly supporting? What legislation is offensive and you're not going to be quiet about it? Are you going to write letters? Are you going to... In Massachusetts, a few years ago, there was a piece of legislation that was going to legalize discrimination against trans folks in public spaces. Like, no, I won't serve you. You can't use the hotel or the movie theater if you're trans. And I wrote a lot and spent a lot of time up in Massachusetts, and so did many, many, many people. And 70% of Massachusetts voted to support trans rights, which is it should have been 100%, but winning something by 70% is not insignificant. So, people put signs on there, right? So signage. So I would say first is elections matter. And, being involved politically, whether it's letter writing or just supporting and knowing what's going on, is not a small thing. Signage makes a big difference. The mezuzah lets the passerby know that this is a Jewish institution or home. Having flags, right? Having signs that say that, love trumps hate, or whatever the Canadian version of that is, conquers hate, right? And then I would say also, part of it is just simply, being and putting in extra effort within communities to make sure that they're accommodating. Like if your synagogue doesn't offer, memberships, discounts for people of the same gender, well, are you okay with that? When, the way in which we use words to describe or make assumptions. When I started doing this work, let's say 5 years ago. So 5.5 years ago, I remember, I met this woman at JTS, and I asked her, so what's your name? Where do you live? I was doing, I was a rabbi at Columbia, and it was part of the, anyways, so she says, my name is whatever, and I'm from here, and I just got engaged. I was like, oh, that's so exciting. What's his name? Where is he from? And so she said to me very kindly, no, her name is, right? So, and she was super lovely about it. And I think had she not been lovely about it, then it might have impacted me. And so we don't know in those small moments. And it even happened, I remember it was exactly 5 years ago, because the Pulse massacre was just 5 years ago yesterday. And I was a rabbi of a synagogue in New York City, and it was on, I think it was Shavuos maybe that year, Motzei Shavuos, and after the Yom Tif, heard about it, and I was heartbroken. I mean, there was a massacre of young people. I cried, and the next morning I saw her, and I was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And she said, "It's just really hard." And I said, "What's going on?" And she's like, "You don't know?" I was like, "I don't know. What don't I know? What are you talking about?" And I mourned that night, right? It was a tragedy, it was a massacre. But I wasn't part of a community that when I saw somebody who was gay and they said it's hard, that I was sensitive at all or connected enough to know that being killed in America for your gender, for your sexual orientation affects people so I would say that whatever that is, I think the word proximity resonates with me as the right word there, but get close to know what's going on, to be in relationship, to hear what's the ask in the moment of the need, in this place at that time. But I mean, I think that's the most important thing. Once you're in community, then you don't need to have some straight guy, pontificate about what would be good for the world. You can speak to your friend, and your friend can say, today, at this moment, this is what I need.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. That was more than 3, but thank you very much.
No, it's a great question.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes. So I just want to again, if there's any other questions, please just type them in the chat, or if you're raising, Sheila, are you raising your hand? Oh, no, okay. So if you have any other questions, please do raise them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much. And I want to say, what is there a nugget or two to end on in terms of where we go from here?
I mean, the world, like you said, it's heavy. We're all exhausted. This last year and a half, the pandemic and all of the things that have happened, people can be exhausted, and rightfully so. We need to chase the joy. Joy is also part of spiritual resistance. It's political resistance. Pride is a time to, have a little bit of fun and, re-nourish and rehydrate and gain some, put some more energy back into the system, that this is just the beginning. We're just getting started. There's so much work to be done. But if we don't take care of ourselves, then what good are we in doing the work? So thank you so much for having me. Last year, I think we were also in conversation for Pride. Next year, God willing, it'll be a chazaka. But it's such a pleasure. It's such holy work. It feels so good to be in community and partnership and in conversation with you as always. And, again, a Chaver Up, it's a verb. Allyship is a verb. It's not just about being an ally. It's about being It's about being an accomplice. And I think at the highest level, it's about making, I think a lot about the planned obsolescence. Like, how are we still talking about allyship? How are we talking about voter, how are we still talking about registering for people to vote and preventing voter, how is it this is still where we are? And we need to become obsolete in this way. We need to just, bring the good and more good and more good until the light is so bright that there's simply no darkness left. Thank you all so very much. It's always such a pleasure, Rabbi. Thank you again.
Rabbi, thank you so much. I cannot wait till we get to see each other one time again in person. And thank you for joining us here in Ottawa. We one day we shall host you here. It's a great place. You will love it. And everybody, Pride Sameach, wishing you again. Let us serve with joy and besimcha. Sort of this higher purpose. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, it's an honor. And you can get Chaver Up wherever your favorite book place is. If you want to do the plug.
Especially if it's on Amazon, if that's your favorite book place. Thank you again. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay well. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.